Today's episode is one you will want to hear. Picture this: a budding anthropologist on the verge of earning her PhD suddenly pivots and finds herself back in her hometown, living under one roof with her parents, grandparents, husband, kids, a cat, and 3 dogs. Sound chaotic? Well, it's just the beginning. Our guest is here to share her journey from the halls of academia to the heart of a multi generational household. We'll dive into why she made such a drastic career change and the challenges and joys of living with so many generations under one roof, and how she balances her personal dreams with the demands of family. But that's not all. Stay with us until the end for some insightful reflections on how these experiences have reshaped her identity and outlook on life. You'll walk away with a fresh perspective on resilience, adaptation, and the beauty of family connections. This is the Diary of a Soul, because behind every face is a story, and behind every story is a lesson. Hey Amber, welcome to Diary of a Soul.
Mhm.
Very thrilled to have you here today. And before we start, I want to do our opening tradition with the show, which is to ask, what's one small thing you did yesterday that brought you some joy?
One small thing yesterday that brought me some joy actually is really easy to answer. I was working on opening a box of books that a friend sent me and that she wrote. So I was recording for social media for her, and I had my 1-year-old helping me, which was total chaos. But it's a really pretty book, so I opened it up, brought it out, and I said, "It's lovely," and he goes, "It's lovely." And he did it so perfectly on camera, and the video was absolute chaos. Like, at one
Right.
point, he's getting scissors off the counter and all this stuff, but I was like, "I'm gonna post it anyway," because "It's lovely" was so perfect.
The little mirror image of you.
Yes, it still gives me smiles today, so that was a highlight of yesterday for sure.
Nice. For me, it was because we had those heavy rainfalls yesterday,
Mhm.
was actually just taking a moment to listen to the rain and enjoy that without moving and just like constantly doing something. And so it's been nice just to attune myself to the sounds of nature more often, especially when those moments come up. But I really think it's important that we highlight these small moments in life that we get joy, because we kind of look towards the big pivotal moments all the time.
Absolutely.
And it's really just kind of like these small magic moments that really help us, I think, get through the day.
And they are every day, like,
They are.
even if you're having a crappy day,
Exactly.
you can find if you think about it, you can usually find one of those moments.
Right. Okay, so let's dive into things. You're on a path to getting a PhD in anthropology, but then life seems like it took a bit of a different direction.
It did.
And I'm kind of curious, before we get into what caused that pivot, what initially drew you to anthropology and what were your goals for pursuing that degree?
So I was drawn to anthropology really early on, like in high school. And when I went to college and got into anthropology, I got even more, it's like this is definitely felt like the route I wanted to go with my life. And the main thing I think it was is that, anthropology is the study of humans and humankind, in all aspects, all the way from, how we evolved to how we lived, you know, originally to how we lived now. Um, and for me, it was twofold. It was, anthropology is a way to help me understand people, for me to understand humanity and the people around me and why we act the way that we do. And then also for me, there was this sense of adventure because anthropology is all about going out and doing field work, studying humans in a variety of ways. If you're an archaeologist, you're digging up stuff. If you're an anthropologist, you're going and living in certain environments and studying humans in that way, whatever your specialty is. But I had a real thirst for adventure. And so, like, my need to understand humanity and what we are and what we're doing and why, coupled with my desire to adventure and see the world, it just felt perfect for me.
Yeah, I can imagine, because it's also, when I think about the subcomponents, there's so many things that are coming together.
Mhm.
You kind of have history and psychology, sociology a bit as well too. And so I think that's one of those degrees I will always keep you interested, because you can pick which
Yes.
sub route you want to continue down.
Yeah,
So
there's
did
so
you kind of
much.
have one of those sub routes in mind when you were pursuing it?
I did. I started in archaeology, and then I learned, when in undergrad, and then I learned more about what cultural anthropology was, and so I kind of pivoted and went into that. And my specialty was actually I had a pen pal in high school that lived in Bangladesh, and everyone's like, "Where is that? What is that place?" Um, in this little country right next to India, and I decided that I wanted to do my studies there, my field work there. And so I still focused on cultural anthropology and medical anthropology and medical systems in Bangladesh. And that's where I was going to go and do my PhD fieldwork.
And you had already visited a couple of times before, right?
Yes, I spent 2 summers there for language school. I went to learn Bengali. Don't ask me to say anything Bengali. It's gone. Most of that has been dumped. Um, but yeah, so I spent 2 summers there, and they were very trying summers, but it was amazing too because it was just one of those places that inside of me had always thirsted to go. As soon as I started learning about their culture and their history, I wanted to go there and visit, and so being able to spend those 2 summers there was really key for me. And I had planned to spend, a year or a few years there for my fieldwork.
So what made you pivot out of your career path?
So that's something I've thought about a lot because there are still days where I'm like, "Why did I do that?" So, I shoulda kept going, but it was basically a series of unfortunate events coupled with complete burnout. Um, so I had finished all my coursework, I had done my comprehensive exams, and those are like this grueling looking back on it, it was basically academic hazing, which is every every PhD program has some level of academic hazing. But it's basically they put you in a room and each of your advisors gives you prompts, and for 4 days, 8 hours a day, you sit with a computer and respond to those prompts.
Oh my god.
And then we're not talking like you don't have internet, you don't have any resources. This is all just stuff you're supposed to be pulling from your brain
Right.
on it might be on anthropological theory, it might be on methods, it might be on the culture. So it's supposed to be based off of your cumulative research and readings and studies that you've been doing towards your PhD. I passed those beautifully. I,
Nice.
my, because you do those days of this examination, which was since grueling. I remember one day I was just literally, I got off the computer and laid down in a ball floor in the
Yeah,
office, and I
I
was
sleep
like,
here
I don't
now.
know if I can do this anymore. And then your advisors all read it, and then you go sit in a room with all your advisors, and they ask you questions about 'em, your responses. So, it was awful, it was terrible, but I think I could do it better now because I think I've been hazed with in life more now, but it was a lot. So I did all of that. I finished all my coursework, I did 2 years of teaching undergrads, I did my comprehensive exam, I had funding. I actually almost had a Fulbright, which would have been like that would have set my career on, like, an amazing, like, to the stars path in terms of anthropology, right? But this was 2016, and there was violence all over the world, and there was some major violence happening in Bangladesh at
Mhm.
that time, particularly against foreigners. They were getting, kidnapped, they were getting macheted. It was pretty bad.
Yeah, not worth a Fulbright.
Well, the Fulbright, they said, "This is a really great project, and we would fund you, but due to the violence in Bangladesh, your, research site is no longer considered safe." So I had a backup funding, and the backup funding was like, "Your research site is no longer considered safe. You can go to India instead if you want." Like, "That's cool, but you don't understand how PhDs work. Like, your PhD project is very niche, like, it's very specific, and mine was very specific to medical systems and outcomes that were happening in Bangladesh. So, as this was going on, I was working part-time at a historic preservation office, this state organization, and they offered me a full-time job. So, I took it, and I asked the university for a leave of absence, while I figured out, well, what am I gonna do? I was like, "I might need to do a whole new PhD project," which is at that point was a big lift. I was broke, they don't give you a lot of money as a PhD student. I was living on, like, $13,000 a year in addition to my part-time job, and a full-time job with benefits where I could clock out at the end of every day and not, have to stress about deadlines and all this stuff and just be done. And, it was very alluring. And so when I asked the university for leave of absence because my research had gotten halted due to violence, they denied it.
Oh, wow.
And said I needed to go ahead and continue paying my continuing enrollment fees. And I was like, I don't think I can do that. I
Right.
remember sitting on the couch one day just, like, with my husband, and I was sobbing because I was like, "I don't know what to do. I don't think I can do this anymore." Like,
Mm.
so I pivoted and worked, full-time in historic preservation, dropped out of my program.
And I'd imagine that came with maybe some resentment towards the university.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I had a lot of feelings about the institution for a while. And, the thing is too, like, I already had been seeing the way higher education institutions operated and their funding and how they treated undergrads and how they treated grad students. So I had already seen a little bit of that and gotten a little disillusioned with that. But at that point, I was pretty much I was burned out, I was broke, my dreams of going to Bangladesh and doing this thing that I had been leading up to for years kinda like came crashing down. And on top of that, my advisor was moving to another university in
Right.
Pennsylvania. I loved her, and she was like, "You can come with me, but you're kinda gonna have to do some stuff again." I was like, "I would love to come with you, but I wanna do my comprehensive exams again at a whole new university? Do I wanna
Right.
jump through all these hoops again at another university?" I'm like, "No, I don't think I do."
And there are the logistics of life,
Yeah.
moving to a different city costs money, living in a different
Mhm.
city with a higher cost of living.
It'd be starting all over again
Right.
somewhere new. So it was a lot. Yeah.
And I think it's an interesting look at how institutions are run these days because it's not like the university you were at had a lack of funds,
No, yeah.
and it's not like you didn't wanna finish your program, you just needed the space to think about how to pivot.
Right.
But in that moment, they wanted you to keep paying while you were virtually not even using them as an institution.
I wasn't. Yeah.
Right,
And then, yeah, I had to start paying more and more stuff out of pocket, and I was like, "I can't do this. Like, I'm
right.
broke." So, yeah, I started just shifted careers, discovered a whole new career with my part-time job, and they liked me so much, they hired me full-time, so,
Nice.
yeah.
So, what's one piece of advice you think you'd give to someone just starting out in the academic sphere?
Oh, that's a good question. I would say just to know how much of it be able to recognize how much of it is going to be hazing, like, because there's a lot of pressure put on students, especially grad students. Like I said, you're not paid a lot. I was teaching undergraduate courses that had up to 120 students in them. I never had a single person come observe me teach. And then on top of all of that you're doing, and you're not having any oversight, you're having, like, excessive amount of oversight with, your projects, and it's being picked apart, and you have to do these ridiculous exams where you sit in a room for 8 hours and have to just spew things from your brain, with no help. I mean, it's hazing. And so going into it knowing that that is what that is, and knowing that the institution probably has different goals than you have, I think is important to remember, and to utilize everything you can from them. Utilize your advisors and talk to them. I think that if I had talked to my advisor more about where I was when it comes to burnout and talked to my department more, I might have gotten more support than I ended up getting because they don't think they knew until I was like, "I'm dropping out. I'm done." I don't think they saw that coming. So, they might have advocated for me, in other words, in the institution, if they had known. But, yeah, so I would say recognize that a lot of it's gonna be hazing just to get you just to weed people out and
Mhm.
push you forward and to not take some of that so seriously, quite frankly.
Yeah,
Uh,
I didn't realize, and this makes complete sense, that you can burn out in an academic setting.
mhm.
I had heard, I know a lot of people that have burned out in professional settings, but it's really no different. It's
Yeah.
more about just knowing your boundaries when you approach anything that can be very challenging.
Yeah, because when you're in a PhD program like that, there's no I said that's what really appealed to me about the job that I ended up getting is, like, there's no clocking out. You work yeah, okay, you can make your own hours, you only teach a few hours a day. Okay, but you're also grading hundreds of papers and lesson planning and you know, designing the course. Because like I said, I had no oversight there. I was made up a course in addition to preparing for your comprehensive exams, and doing all those readings and, oh, also helping your professors with research that they wanna do so you can get your name on publications and making sure you know what your PhD project is legitimate and applying for grants and, when do you stop and take a break? And that was, I mean, never. There was night Friday nights where I would be, like, sitting drinking wine, doing responses 'cause you're taking courses too, so doing your responses to your courses for your professor while you also get emails from students going, "Is this due in? Do I have to do this like this?" So, yeah,
Yeah, it's a
it's
lot.
it's a lot. It's a lot to juggle.
Yeah, it's not just the thing you wanna study. There's so many other
Yeah,
components that are wrapped up in your academic career path.
it's a lot to juggle, and on top of that, you're hella broke. So, there's that stress too, like
Right.
any added thing, my car was dying at the time, my family's on the other side of the country too, we're living in this gross apartment, it's a lot of that too, so, yeah,
Yeah, it's a journey.
it's a journey for sure.
Well, speaking of family, after you pivoted out of your academic career, you came back home to live with your family in Chesterfield, Virginia.
I stayed in Missouri, for several years working full time for the state, and I had liked that job. It had its own problems like any job does, but my family was far away, and my mom was caretaking both of my elderly grandparents, and I was feeling the call to come home,
Right.
and help her. So I did. I came home. We moved back here 2019. Moved into my husband and my dog and my cat moved into my mom's basement, thinking we'd be there for a few years at most. And yeah, things kind of snowballed from there.
So can you describe the family dynamics when you first moved back versus how they've evolved over time till now?
Yeah, and they've evolved quite a bit. So when we first moved in, it was my mom and my stepdad, who were at the time in their late 60s, my granddad and my grandma, who were both in their early 90s. And my granddad's health was pretty rapidly failing. He was getting kind of needy at that time in various ways,
Sure.
and stubbornly not wanting any assistance. And then there was my husband and I in our early 30s at the time. And we moved in, and when you first move back home, there's a lot to unpack because we had been in Missouri for 7 years. So you move back and you have all these feelings about moving home and you have things have changed, but things are also really a lot the same. So you're coping with this is where I am in life and this is where these people are in life and how are we all going to interact and get along? And in fact, I think I remember my mom telling me that my granddad was like, I hope we all get along. And we did. I mean, we did for the most part. We had some stuff to work through, like any family does. Especially because we moved back summer 2019. I got pregnant January of 2020,
Wow.
really early January 2020. And then we all know what happened.
Right.
Just a few months later, the pandemic hit. And so we're in a household with a newly pregnant woman and two elderly people. And we have this pandemic saying that, this is killing people and you can't go out of your house, essentially, right? So then we were all stuck together. And I often think about how different our lives would have been if we had stayed in Missouri, because that would have happened while we were there, and it would have been totally different. Everything about our lives would have been totally different. But then we had to make that transition, and so my first son was born October of 2020, and my granddad went into hospice not long after that, and then he died December 2020.
Oh,
Yeah, so that was a quite the transition.
yeah.
um, of having, new life coming in and old life going out at the same time.
Right. And in the same household,
Mhm.
you get that usually with your family, but to have it happen before your eyes, I think gives it a lot more weight.
It did, and especially because I should mention that my granddad was in hospice at home, so he was at home when he was dying. So he had a heart problem that was made his dementia worse. He would get really, really confused, especially at night. There's this syndrome called, sundowners, where the sun goes down and your dementia and confusion gets a lot worse, but they also get this, like, weird boost in energy.
Not the
So,
time for that.
not the time for that. I mean, because so he would get up and wander around and look for people, start talking, and I distinctly remember, being downstairs and rocking my son, who's only, like, a month old, to sleep in the middle of the night because you do that a lot with newborns, and hearing my granddad walking around upstairs, calling for people or crying out, moaning, and so he was actively, experiencing his transition while my son is experiencing his transition into the world, you know?
Right.
Um,
With almost like a haunting aspect happening
yes.
in the house.
And feeling pretty isolated because it was in the middle of a pandemic. So
Right.
even though we had hospice workers coming in, they really kept their distance. They were only there when they really had to be and for very short. So we were very there was 6 of us, 7 of us in the house when you add Rowan, my oldest,
Mm.
and so there were 7 of us in the house, but we were all isolated together at very different stages of our lives, so
Right.
yeah.
And how did you navigate personal space and boundaries with all those peoples when you're sharing a household like that?
We're still figuring that out,
Yeah.
honestly.
Probably everyone in the world.
Yes, yes, it was hard, and my mom and I have been working on that for years now, since then, in terms of, like, trying to make sure everybody has their own space, but also not being overrun with stuff. And that was the thing is that when my mom had moved my grandparents from North Carolina into her house with her just a few years before we moved in,
Mm.
so they brought all their stuff, and mom already had a bunch of stuff, and then we come bring in all of our stuff, so for years, it's just been like we've just been trying to go through all of this just stuff, and that's been maddening too,
Right.
because you want your own space, but you're just overrun with clutter a lot of the time, and that's finally getting better. It's finally getting more manageable, but people
Just
like
burn it all.
yeah, there's been moments. But people have carved out their space, and right now, things have really transitioned with our space, but, we basically had the downstairs at that time, and they had the upstairs and they had their rooms. And right now my boys are transitioning to their own room. So that's a whole nother thing because I've been doing the whole like hardcore co-sleeping with my husband's like in this dark room in the basement. He's like, this is my space. And he still is like, this is going to stay in my
Yeah.
space. You can have it, honey. You
Yeah.
can have it.
Well, at least he's carved that out for
Yeah.
himself.
Yeah.
Have there been any surprising lessons just having older and younger people in your orbit, your immediate orbit like that?
Absolutely. And this is something I've thought about a lot when, going back to leaving my academic career, and that was kind of for a while, that was, like, my primary goal in life was, "I'm gonna, get my PhD, and I'm gonna be an anthropologist, and I'm gonna travel the world, and I'm gonna do this phenomenal research," big-headed young person I was.
Sure.
Um, and I thought that was what was gonna help me learn about life and humanity, and I've learned so much more about life and humanity in the last, 4 years than I did my whole time studying humans professionally, academically. Because I learned a lot about myself. I learned about where I came from. I learned about things about my grandparents that I never knew before living with them in their last years. I learned about caretaking and what that entails and how difficult that can be and the stress that can put on a family and how everybody copes differently, because we all have coped differently, and we've had moments where we none of us could stand each other, and we've had other moments where it's like, "What are we gonna do without each other?"
Which is a great description of family, I think.
Yes,
Sometimes,
yes, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And had you ever considered because, your family made that decision to bring your grandparents home,
Mhm.
was there ever a decision to put them in a different home, a caretaking facility?
It was definitely talked about and kicked around. mostly after granddad passed because um so my grandparents has specifically asked my mom, like in their final, requests and will and testament and all that stuff that she take care of them basically.
Mm,
They didn't specify how, right?
right.
In terms of maybe you can bring in help or whatever, but they really wanted to stay home as much as possible for as long as possible. And they did. My mom, kudos to my mom. She kept them both home and they both died in at home.
Mm,
But granddad's passing was really tough. He fought a lot. So he was sick and dying, and you would think that would make him a weak old man, but he was not. I mean, he was fighting tooth and nail. He did not want to go. He was not ready to go, and he did not realize he was as old as he was.
right.
So I remember one night he looked over at my grandma and he was like, "Where is Grace? Where is she?" We are like, "She's right there, hon. She's right here with you." And he was like, "Oh, no, no, no." 'Cause he saw an old lady, and in his mind, we're not these old people that people are saying we are. So it was really hard, and those last few weeks of his life, um, he would say things like express regrets, but you couldn't get to what he might be referring to, and he would fight, and he would get up in the middle of the night and try to wander around, and he would argue with you, and you'd have to, like, push him back down into his bed and stuff like that, and it got really hard for my mom especially. It was hard for even her to even give him his medications because she just kept thinking, "Well, what if his medications are hurting him?" So when after he passed, my mom was like, "I don't know if I can do that again." And she did. She did it again because 2023, my grandma started she obviously started decline after my granddad passed. They had been married for, like, 70 some years. And so we all thought after he went that she wouldn't be far behind him because, that's they were each other's lives in a lot of
Mm,
ways. So but she lasted quite a while considering her own health and age and losing him. But 2023, she really started to decline. And at the time, I was pregnant with my second son. So, yeah, that we kinda started the cycle again
right.
in a different way. It was a loaded time for sure.
And your first son, do you think he'll have any memories of his grandparents?
Yeah.
Or I guess his great
His
grandparents?
great-grandparents, and I wonder at that I think he's already forgetting we called grandma Gigi for him, and I think he's already forgetting her because I asked him stuff sometimes, just curiosity. So when she passed, he had just turned 3. He was, like, 3 in 1 month, so he had just turned 3. And he knew her well, but at the same time, she was this, little old lady who couldn't do much, who needed a lot. She couldn't really play with him. He would try to engage her, and she would be like, "I don't wanna do that."
Right.
Like, nah. Um,
Too much of an age gap.
yes. But he would, like, go in she had a little jar of candies next to her bed always, of Hershey bars and stuff, and he would go in there and steal them all the time. She'd be like, "Are you getting my candy bars?" And um, so still sometimes I think he knows, like, that was Gigi's chair, that was Gigi's room, and now my mom has moved into that room, and we have pictures of her, and he kinda can know, but I think he's already forgetting. And which is interesting because I mean, he was there, he was there when granddad died, but he was only a couple months old. I mean, I remember I was holding him when my mom was like, "I think he's gone. Can you come check?" So I was holding Rowan when I was touching my dead granddad to see if he was still alive or if he had passed.
Wow.
So he was so close to death so early, which is very different from my life. And I feel like a lot of Americans, we kind of keep death is often pushed, as far away as we can get it
Yeah.
in our culture. And we were like, well, here it is. And he was there when grandma went into hospice. She also was at hospice at home, and we had hospice nurses, and she moved back to her bedroom and then never came out of her bedroom again, basically. He saw all of that. I don't know how much of that he processed or is gonna retain. I'm sure there are some core memories there, though, in some capacity.
Yeah. And very important, I mean, for everyone involved, just to be closer with death and be present
Mhm,
with death. Because, like you said, we don't, especially in America, we are not close to it.
mhm.
We send bodies off to be painted, basically, and
Yeah.
preserved so that we can maintain this certain image of them when they leave us. But in terms of having that happen within your household, I think you're able to more healthily process what death means.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really beautiful experience for the entire family. Even though it can be scary, right,
Mhm.
to touch a dead body or be around a dead body.
And I think that what made it the scariest for me was that my granddad and my grandma both, like, didn't wanna go. They're both like, "No, we wanna live forever.
Right.
We wanna keep on keeping on," and, that informed me in my life too because seeing how that transition was for them, it wasn't an easy transition for them. They struggled at the end, and granddad especially, but grandma too. I mean, there's a point where she kept falling, and this is right before she went into hospice. She kept falling, and we are like, "She needs help. We need help. We need help." She kept falling and falling and falling and, hurting herself, right? So finally get into hospice, and she fell some more. I mean, she fell to where we couldn't get her back to bed. We had to call, 911 to get them to help to get people there to help us get her back in the bed. Then she didn't wanna stay down. She wanted to keep getting up. We had to, like, physically restrain her sometimes, like, "Grandma, no, you can't look, you can't get up, you can't walk. If you get halfway there, you're gonna fall and hurt yourself. We can't get you back in bed." It was all these things, and so, for me, it's informed my life in the sense that I wanna move forward not so I don't wanna live forever, for one. Let me go there. Um, that's a lot of work, it's a lot of effort,
Right.
and I wanna transition on to the next thing, whatever that may be, and I wanna do it as peacefully as possible. And so, coming more face to face with death and understanding death and sickness and how we make that transition, I think is important for me moving forward. And also knowing that, okay, well, I'm next up on the caretaker list, right? So, in terms of my mom and my stepdad, my dad, they're in their 70s. My stepmom's younger, she's in her 60s, but they're all gonna need help at some point. So, it's me and my sister.
And
Yeah.
you've kind of had, in a way, an apprenticeship
Mhm.
to see how this is done, watching your mom take care of her parents.
Yeah, and I learned a lot from that. And then, also caretaking small children at the same time and seeing how that goes because some of it comes full circle.
Mm.
It's like, "Oh, the baby needs a diaper change. Oh, granddad needs a diaper change." It comes around. So, navigating all of that, and also you just setting yourself up for how you want your children to deal with that too. Because at some point, I might be in that situation too where I'm gonna need some caretaking, and what do I want to put on my kids?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Well, I would say even though you didn't get a formal PhD in anthropology, you definitely got one just by living in a multi-generational household.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, like I said, I've learned a lot. And I mean, I come at it sometimes with with my anthropological hat on
Of
too,
course.
because I'm like, American society is very much, independence is important and you live with your family and then you move out and you create your own nuclear family but humans aren't really meant to live that way. We're meant to live in our families,
Mhm.
in small tribes, and have a support system for not only for the elders, but for the young people too. And so we have a lot of parents who are living in a nuclear household in modern society who are really struggling because they have to take care of these kids all the time and do all this work all the time and support this house all the time. And that's really not how humans are supposed to be. We're all supposed to be I know it's cliched, but it's true. Like, it takes a tribe, right?
Right.
We're all supposed to be helping each other out. We're supposed to help take care of our elders, take care of ourselves, take care of our kids. We're all supposed to tap in and tap out of that. So, for better or for worse, that's what we've been doing. So, yeah.
Wow. Well, another journey.
Yes.
Well, I want to dive into your process into becoming a mom,
Mhm.
which comes with a lot of untold stories and challenges.
Always, yeah.
And I think one of the topics that often remain in the shadows is miscarriage. Can you share your journey with us, including any experiences of miscarriage and how they've shaped your path to motherhood?
Yeah, so my first pregnancy actually ended in a miscarriage. Um, so I got right before we moved back to Virginia from Missouri, that's when we decided that we were ready to start a family. By we, I was like, "Do we wanna do this? I'm ready." And he was like, "I guess I'm ready if you're ready." So, um, I was late 20s, 30s. How old was I then? Yeah, early 30s. So, the biological clock was ticking, so I got knew we were planning on moving back, so we stopped using protection, and we got pregnant. And it was a very, interesting experience because it was terrifying at the time, but also really, really exciting, but also you don't wanna get really excited because yeah, I went to school for a long time, my gut reaction with anything is to research it. So, I research anything that new happens in my life, I'm like, "Let's research this. See what this is about." And pregnancy was obviously one of those things, and so I researched it pretty adamantly, and knew that miscarriage is really, really common. My mom had had a few throughout her life. I know other people who have, but like you say, it's not really talked about very much. A lot of women's health stuff isn't, but that's definitely one that's not, and I think it's because a lot of people don't know how to process it or how to react. Because the most common reaction you get is, "Well, you can try again." But there's a lot that's happening when you're having a miscarriage. So, I was only about 8 weeks when I had my miscarriage. So but I knew immediately when it was happening. So, I started bleeding, and I was like, "I don't think this is quite normal." And what I did was I already knew again, I already had researched, that I wanted to go with midwives for my pregnancies, and I'd already picked my midwives out in Richmond here because I knew we were moving back. So I called them and I was like, "I haven't gotten an appointment with you guys yet or anything like that, but I know that I'm pregnant and this is what's happening." And they were like, "Well, a little bit of bleeding is pretty normal. But if it gets to be where you're, doing a certain amount over a certain amount of time, then that's kind of alarming." It's like, "Okay." And the strangest part about this whole thing is that this was a week. So Sunday I started bleeding, and the next day my husband was leaving to go on this retreat at a monastery, and he was gonna be out of touch for a whole week. And he never did anything like that. He has not done anything like that since. He's never done anything like that before. But this was the week, right? And, I was really excited for him because he was really getting into his spirituality. He had just converted to Catholicism and gone through that whole official process. Like, he
Right.
had officially become Catholic. And so he found this monastery, several hours away and decided that he wanted to go and spend a week there with the monks. I was like, totally supportive, very cool for him to do. But of course, that's the day that started bleeding. But I called the midwives. They said everything was fine. I was like, everything should be fine. You just go. But I kind of knew deep down something wasn't right. So I spotted for several days. This was also 4th of July week. I spotted for several days. And then on the July 3rd, I had a friend over and we were watching movies and I was bleeding heavily at that point and I didn't tell her. And still haven't told her this happened.
Wow.
So she might listen to this and be like, "I can't believe you never told me." She still doesn't know that any of this happened, but, I knew at that time that that was what was happening, that I was having a miscarriage, and, she went home, and that night I kind of tried to sleep, and the next morning I got up and was like, "Well, I know that my research, I know that what they usually do is a blood test to see your certain levels of chemicals in your blood associated with pregnancy, and if they're going down." So you do one blood test one day, and then 3 days later, you do another blood test, and if it's going down, then you're having a miscarriage, which again, I just knew it. I already knew it. So I went to patient first because I was like, "Well, they should be able to blood test." And they're like, "You?" I was like, "Yeah, hi, I think I'm having a miscarriage." And I'm always just like I've always been just matter of fact about stuff like
Right.
that. And always in the moment, I see people's face and I'm like, "Oh, this is maybe not a normal matter of fact situation." But, so the woman's face was like, "Oh, we don't do that here. You need to go to the ER." I'm like, "Cool, my first ER trip by myself."
Yeah.
So I called the monastery. They did not answer. Of course, my husband's phone is off. He's like, "Well, I really don't wanna bother him. There's nothing he can do, but this is a weird situation to go through by myself."
Mm.
Again, my friend is probably gonna be like, "You did not need this. You coulda called me." And for some reason, I just didn't. I didn't no one really knew that I was pregnant at the time. So Anyway, yeah, I end up going to the hospital, and they end up doing all these super invasive tests, which now, if I could tell someone now, you can tell them not to do that stuff. Like, it was an internal ultrasound. I didn't need that. It was miserable, it was horrible. I wish I hadn't done it, because you know what ended up happening? They did the internal ultrasound, they took some blood, they took some pee, they said, "Okay, we took your blood, you can go home now and come back in 3 days to get your other blood test,"
Oh, wow.
which I already knew, right?
Right.
So, that experience was actually pretty traumatic for me, and at the time, I just was going through it because that's what I just do that. In times of stress, I just do it and have trouble processing it later. So, it was months later that I was still, like, I was kind of in a depression. I went into a really deep depression afterwards. And part of that, I think, is the chemical changes in your body, because even though I was only 8 weeks in, my body had already started going through a lot of physical transitions.
Of course.
And so then you have all these hormonal changes, and that can impact your mood. So I think, coupled with the loss, which, yeah, only 8 weeks in, and I had been cautious, but still in my mind, I had little nicknames for the baby. I called them my little bee, and you already had all these things. You had these glowing, dreams happening, even if you're trying not to, it happens, right? So yeah, I went into a pretty deep depression afterwards, and I was really nervous about trying again. And of course, the doctor who called and was like, after my second blood test. Oh, yeah, that was the other thing. After my second blood test, no one called me to let me know what was
Oh,
going
really?
on. So I called the hospital and was like, "So, what's going on?" They were like, "Oh, yeah, okay. Well, we'll get someone to call you." So finally, a doctor called me, and I feel like, my mind was like, these people were drawing straws to see, like, who's gonna call a lady and tell her that she's having a miscarriage. I'm like, "Can someone just tell me?" So a doctor called, and of course, her words were, "Well, you can just try again." You know? She's like, "It's actually really you have really good success if you get pregnant within a year. You just try again." So that's kinda how that keeps going. Just try again, just try again. It's no big deal, it's no big deal. But meanwhile, you've had this transition, and you've had this, and then there's always the thought, "What if you try again? What happens again?" Um, so yeah, I had a really hard time transitioning to the next step after that. And in fact, I didn't. I was really struggling. I was in a depression. I didn't know what I was doing with my life. I had just moved back home. I didn't have a job. I had this miscarriage. My granddad was dying. I had to deal with all these new family dynamics again. I had just a lot going on. And I was like, I don't know what I'm doing with my life. I don't know what's happening. And as usual, it was my husband who was like, "Look, what are we doing?"
You need some direction.
Yes. "Are we trying again? Are we not? Like, I just need to know." And I was like, "Okay, okay, let's fine. Let's try again. Let's try again." Of course, then I got pregnant during a pandemic, so then I had to deal with that.
Right.
That scenario.
It's interesting listening to you tell this story. It makes me realize that there isn't any room or rituals to process the grief of a miscarriage.
Mhm.
Everything is set up to get to the next point.
Yes.
You have to make that decision of, do you want to keep trying? And that's the push of, well, here are the stats. Most people do really well if you try again.
Right.
And they don't realize that we form emotional attachments to things as humans.
Mhm.
So I'd imagine you were building a story already in your head of what this baby would mean to you and your family.
Absolutely,
And
yeah.
then it's taken away from you. And then people say, well, just keep trying
Mhm.
without honoring that lost story, you know?
Yeah. A lost story, and then again, your body transitioning too, so it's just a lot. It's more to deal with, and like I said, it was relatively early miscarriage. I can't imagine if you were farther along, the feelings that would come with that too. Because the more that you incubate that life, the more connected you get with it regardless, because yeah, you're telling the story, you're building the story, you're building a life. So that life is lost one way or the other, in some capacity.
Do you wish that you had any rituals for processing and mourning that loss?
I wish I had told more people at the time. I waited to tell my mom because she was dealing with a lot of stuff with my granddad. So I didn't tell her until we were sitting on the front porch one day after that, and she was like, "So when are you gonna have grandbabies?" And I was like, "Oh, well, I actually had a miscarriage like 2 months ago," and then she just started bawling, was her reaction.
Of course,
Um,
because it's hitting her all at once, right?
yeah, yeah. She's like, "Never keep me thinking like that." I was like, "Well, you had good stuff going on." I didn't know if I could do anything about it, right? But I wish I had told more people because I know a lot of people would have been really supportive of it, and I don't know why I didn't. I really don't. I think a big thing about miscarriage, because it's not talked about very much, but I think a lot of women end up blaming themselves in some capacity. Like, "Oh, maybe I shouldn't have done that. Maybe this is what did it. Maybe I didn't even know I was pregnant. I had a drink or something like that, any number of things. I shouldn't have smoked that joint that night, or my diet wasn't good, or I ran too fast, and even though you can read all about it, that's not miscarriages happen all the time for all kinds of reasons and for no reason. They just happen. But I think as a mother, a person that's trying to become a mother, it's like this mom guilt is like built in as soon as you get pregnant. And so I think a lot of moms blame themselves. And so I think maybe that's why, just thinking about it right now, maybe that's why I didn't tell more people, is I had a little bit of guilt about it. And I didn't know people reacted in so many different ways when I did tell them that I didn't maybe feel comfortable sharing that.
Right.
Because people also don't know what to say, right? Nobody knows what to say. But after I had that miscarriage, like, I didn't tell my mother-in-law, and she was hounding us to have a baby, at the time, and it's like there's all sorts of stress I probably could have taken off of myself if I had been more open about our journey. And I got really lucky. I had they call it the next baby. If you have a miscarriage and then you have a successful pregnancy afterwards, that's called a rainbow baby.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
Yeah. So I had a really successful second pregnancy, and childbirth and all of that stuff was really beautiful and amazing. And that has definitely softened the blow of having a miscarriage, having 2 kids since then. But it's still like it's a big thing for your body and your psyche, having something like that, especially because we were having a big transition in our life at that time too. Quit my job, I didn't have a job. My career was where I still don't know where my career is. So, yeah, there's a lot to it, but it should be talked about more. So I'm glad that you brought it up here. For sure.
Yeah, of course. And thank you for sharing that story.
Yeah.
So now you have 2 beautiful kids,
Yeah.
and I'm curious, what are some of the unexpected joys and challenges of motherhood?
Oh man. Yeah, it's definitely something like I try sometimes to think about myself before I became a mom, like what my expectations were as a mom, and I just don't even know. I'm like, what was I even thinking about? Like why did I want to have kids? And I don't say that like in a like, what was I doing? This was stupid kind of way, but just like really thinking like what were my motivations then? Because I really didn't know.
Mm,
I knew that I wanted to have kids. I knew that it was time, but now that I have them, I really know that then I had no idea what it entailed because it is so much work, especially in modern society. But there's like beauty there that you've never, I had never witnessed before. Just in how they look at you. They wake up and, like, there's this thing I do with both of them where they seem they're looking for me, and I'll bend down and put my arms out, and the way that they, like, run to you, you just know you're their safe space, and it's just a beautiful thing just to know that you're their safe space and how much you love them and to see that love returned. It's a relationship that I really didn't understand until I experienced it with them, and seeing them grow and experience the world and then seeing their relationships grow, like seeing them make friends and interact with other people and interact with their world, and they've taught me stuff too. Everything from just how to deal with a little human, right? But also to remembering what it's like to see things for the first time. And that's really been a really cool thing for me is like watching that and just like what was I doing with so my second son's name is Everett, and he's 1. He turned 1 in May, and the stuff that just makes him giggle, like, there was this little sliver of a plastic bag on the floor yesterday, and he was like, "What's that? What's that?" I picked it up and showed it to him, and he dropped it, and he couldn't find it, and then I was like, here it is," because then he was like, "Ah, where'd it go? Where'd it go?" It's just a little sliver of a plastic bag. We don't care about stuff like this, right? But to him, it's like, "What is this interesting little thing?" And he picks it up and he's like, "Hee, hee, hee, hee," like, this is just great, and we are so, by the time you reach adulthood and your 30s especially, I feel like you're pretty jaded about the everyday things unless you spend time around children, and then you're like, everyday things can be amazing again, and they help me remind me of that, and, you know, Rowan, my oldest, is gonna turn 4 in October, and seeing him grow and develop all these interests, and now I'm having to develop these interests, and I'm learning stuff about dinosaurs and, fields that I never was interested in, that now I'm like, I know all about heavy machinery. I know all about dinosaurs now, and it's cool because 'cause I'm learning stuff I never would have learned before, and then they ask you questions to make you think about the world in ways that you never.
So many questions.
So he asked me the other day, he was like, "Mom, why does water make things wet?" You're like, "Dude, there's um, scientists somewhere could probably give you an answer to that." I don't know. Um, but yeah, I mean, I went to grad school for a long time. I learned a lot of critical thinking, but you learn a totally different kind of critical thinking when you have children. Um,
Yeah, of course. And to be able to distill down a complex answer so that they can
mhm.
understand it, and also within the parameters of how you want to introduce the world to them as
Right.
well, because some things or some topics they may not be ready for. And so I think it's a really interesting lesson of, do you actually understand these more complex things if you can explain it to,
Yes.
a toddler?
Oh, yeah. And that is a good challenge. It's a good challenge. And it's in living in a multi-generational house too, it's interesting because we had different generations living here, so we have a lot of different ways of approaching parenthood and raising children and what they should be eating, what they should be watching, uh, what they should be just doing on a daily basis. And, I'm a millennial. I'm a millennial. I can't deny it. Probably a stereotypical millennial in lots of ways. My parents are more of the boomer generation, right? So we definitely have we come from different worlds. And yet we're all raising these 2 new humans to live in this world. And I think that's really valuable because they're learning stuff from their grandparents that they're not gonna learn from me and dad, and vice versa. And the grandparents are there when we hit our roadblocks too, when mom and dad just can't anymore. You know? Grandparents are really great for stepping in then. And they've learned, to give them credit too, they've learned a lot in their life since they raised kids. They've learned a lot. So I think
Right.
they can approach it in a way that's different than they might have approached it when we were kids.
And what would you say your philosophy is when it comes to parenting your kids?
So I try to be really honest. Honesty is really big for me, and I want my kids to have a good emotional awareness because I feel like that's something that my generation has struggled with. I think we are increasingly emotionally aware, but we don't know how to deal with it. I think that's a problem for us 90s kids, and that's a whole nother can of worms. But I want them to be emotionally aware and be able to deal with their emotions in a healthy way. I say that because, I have anxiety. My mom has anxiety. I didn't even know my grandma had anxiety until I moved in with them and then saw her anxiety firsthand and how anxious she was. And so that's this like generational thing that I see coming on down the line. And we don't mean to pass it on, but you can't help it, right? If you're a highly anxious, especially like my grandma, she was born in what, 1930? She lived through the freaking World War II,
Right.
Like, I can imagine why she had some anxiety. My granddad lived in a shack with a dirt floor when he was growing up, but they had a lot of psychological stuff that their generation just didn't even it was totally dismissed, right? Swept under the rug. Like, you don't talk about these things, you don't deal with them. And I think, each generation, I think we try to figure that stuff out a little more, do a little bit better.
Right. The birth of responsibility.
Yes. And so I've seen my almost 4-year-old son say that he gets nervous about stuff sometimes. And I'm like, all right, here we go. Let's do this work now, buddies.
I wish my parents knew that lesson.
But they didn't. They were still working through their own stuff. They didn't have parents who were emotionally aware. So we each gotta, I feel like we're all gonna mess something up, right? As parents. People aren't perfect. You're with your kid all the time. You can't be perfect all the time. I lose my patience sometimes, but I make sure that he knows that I'm sorry I lost my patience. I'm sorry I'm frustrated.
Right.
I try to express that in a way that he knows, and that I'm feeling emotions and that it's okay. Because when he feels emotions, I want him to know it's okay to feel his emotions, but this is how we deal with them in a healthy manner.
Right.
And that's what we're struggling with right now. He's a three-nager, so he has a big emotion and he wants to throw something or he wants to hit you or he wants to bite his baby brother, so granted, he's a little guy, so he's still working on all that stuff, but I'm like, "The sooner we work through this, the better it's gonna be for you. I know
Of
that's
course.
true. I'm sure millennials are gonna mess up in some way that you're gonna have to deal with your kids, but, we'll each try to do a little better until we all reach enlightenment, I guess."
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because it reminds me of parents almost like the bumpers at a bowling alley, to
Mhm.
sort of help guide them towards hitting the pins in a bit.
Yes.
And, you kind of have to make sure they see the resolution of a negative emotion.
Yeah.
Even though, like you said, you may lose your temper or lose your patience, they need to see the part where you make up, the part where you apologize,
Mhm.
because I think that's the part that is often missing.
Yeah.
Kids maybe will catch glimpses of an argument and then not see that there is a process you have to go through afterwards to make things better. And so I think that's really key.
Yeah, I think that's a really good analogy. Um, and I think that our parents or my parents did a good job at protecting me from some things, but they had their own emotional stuff to deal with.
Of course.
And they didn't necessarily deal with it in a healthy manner. And I observed that as a kid, and I internalized a lot of stuff. And so I have trouble sometimes with that. And even seeing them now, if my parents now experience an emotion, it's sometimes triggering for me because it just brings up childhood anxieties that, I have. I'm like, okay, well, I still got to deal with that a little bit, I guess. So yeah, that's a big thing for me with parenting. Like I want to be honest with my kids about me and our relationships with the family and everybody and how we interact with each other, but also about the world because I think they need that. They're gonna need to be moving forward in the world, they're gonna need to be resilient, and so I definitely want to instill some resiliency in them without them being hard, and that's the trick, I
Yeah,
think.
it's a fine balance.
Yeah. Uh,
Do you ever see glimpses of your grandparents in your kids?
yes, I do, especially not necessarily my grandparents that just passed, interestingly enough, maybe I'll see more of that later. I guess I still have a lot of emotional stuff too to work through in terms of their loss, but my dad's parents I lost, years ago, and my granddad, that side, his name was well, he was called Naughty. His nickname was Naughty. We actually called him Granddad Naughty. My grandma never called him anything but Naughty, so that was his name, basically. And there are things that my eldest son does that are Granddad Naughty. I mean, there's this little smirk he gets when he's getting ready to do something that he knows he shouldn't do. It's this, like, little half grin that is, like, straight through that genetic line. And there's things that he does that he knows he's being naughty, and you'll catch him in the middle of something, you're like, "What are you doing?" He goes, "Sorry, sorry." Or he says a lot of the times he does something he shouldn't do, and usually it's when he pushes or kicks or bites his baby brother. He's like, "I didn't mean to." It's like, "Yeah, you did though. You definitely meant to." We've already started calling him Little Naughty because he picks up those things, so but another cool aspect of having kids that is interesting to me, and especially in living in a household that's had this transition of, like, life and death, is you do see how we are all 'cause people die and they're gone, right? That's kind of what makes us scared of death, right? And scared of, even if you're not afraid of your own self dying, you're afraid of your people dying, right?
Hmm.
Because you're never going to see them again. But I still see a lot of aspects of my family that have left us and the family that's still here. And it can be everything from both of my sons have blue eyes. My husband and I, neither one have blue eyes. My granddad did. But more so what I'm seeing now is that as I see my parents transition into being older, I see more of my grandparents in them.
Oh, wow.
So, especially in the last year, oh, it's not even last year, grandma hasn't even been dead a year. She died in November 5th, 2023. But since my grandma died, I've seen so much of her in my mom, and I've seen so much of my granddad in my mom. And so, like, I'll look out the window and she'll be in the backyard with the boys and she'll be like standing in a certain way, or she'll say something with a certain tone. And it's just like granddad or grandma was standing there and it's her. And so, even though they're gone, they're not really gone because there's pieces of them in all of us, whether we know it or not, and mom doesn't even realize it sometimes. I'm like, you sounded just like grandma when you said that, um, and the more she ages now that grandma has passed and that kind of that difficult transition is gone and we're kind of in a lull period right now, where nothing crazy is happening, which is kind of the first time in 4 years. I'm seeing my mom transition into this older woman, and she struggles with that sometimes. She's like, "I'm getting old. I feel old." I hear that from my parents a lot. And, like, my dad's the same way. I see my grandma in him. He's all like, "I'm cold. Aren't you cold?" It's like, "Dad, it's 95 degrees outside." He's like so we gradually it's another kinda cliche that you become your parents, right? But I'm literally watching it happen
Sure.
to my parents, or seeing them become their parents, which to them, they're probably like, "Oh god, no." But to me, I love my grandparents and I miss them, so being able to see those little bits of them, in my parents has been really, really fun.
Yeah, that's fascinating. It's almost honoring the great cycle, whatever that
Yes.
may be.
Yes.
So that can be very nostalgic and warming to
Yes.
experience those things within your family.
It is, and it makes me happy for my kids because I know that they have good grandparents who love them and they're gonna give them rich experiences, the same kind that I had growing up with my grandparents. So, like, my dad he's a silly my son calls him silly. He's like, "Granddad is so silly." And that's how my granddad Naughty was. He was super silly too, always doing goofy dances and singing, uh and that is one thing about my sons that I see too. They love to dance, and my grandparents all love to dance. And last November at my cousin's wedding, my 3-year-old son was like the center of the dance floor doing all these crazy dances. There's all these pictures from her wedding of him like just cutting a rug, man, in the middle of the dance floor. It was like my granddad was there in him. like so Well, yeah, that's something that's really comforted me in the loss of my grandparents and seeing their transitions, because 'cause I'm like, they're still here in their own ways. Whatever you believe about the afterlife, whatever your religion is, I don't even know, none of us really knows the answers to any of those questions, but what happens to us, but we are all kind of part of each other in a way, for sure.
Yeah, echoes.
Mhm. Yeah, and I can see it pretty directly, so.
So you've kind of had all these pivotal moments in life,
Mhm.
shifting out of academics and moving back home and your path to motherhood. And I kind of want to explore how these experiences intersect and influence one another.
Mm.
Living in a multi-generational household obviously brings its own unique sets of joys and challenges. How do you think that setup affected how you are raising or raised your kids when your grandparents were alive, especially?
That's a great question. So, we first had our first son, we really did not we did not plan on staying in the house. We definitely planned on moving out and having our own space. We were actually pretty adamant about that for a while. Pandemic kind of threw some stuff off, then the housing market threw some stuff off. the grandparents getting sick and my mom needing help kind of, instigated us probably wanting to stay more. There's a lot of variables there. We were really torn for a while about what to do. But just financially and in terms of support for everyone, it seemed like it was best for us to kinda stay together. Even though some days you're like, "Why? We all hate each other. Oh, we all need each other." So, you know, there were days, especially early on, where I really struggled with it because I felt like I couldn't necessarily raise my kids in the way that I thought I wanted to. Like I wanted, maybe a house with no screen time. All right. So, because if you're a parent now, you know all about how terrible screen time is. It's everywhere. Oh my God, you let your kids watch the TV and screens and tablets and blah, 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 blah. And my grandparents lived and died in front of the television. We have televisions in how many rooms in our house? How many TVs do we have? One, two, three, four, five TVs in our house? Yeah, which horrifies my dad. But so, yeah, I was like, is this how I wanna raise my kids? There's all the there's junk food in the cabinet, there's TVs on all the time, there's sensory overload, right? Is this what we wanna do? So there were definitely times where I was just like this I was disappointed in myself because I had this solid career path, I was gonna take care of myself. Then, I had kids, and there's certain ways you have kids, you have expectations for yourself as a parent too and how you wanna raise them. And there were definitely days where I was like, I'm not doing this how I had hoped and wanted to do it." Now, with a little more experience and letting myself think about it a little more, I just think this is an ideal setup for them. Sure, okay, you know what? They get too much screen time. I think most kids probably do. And I think that's the case even if we lived in a household with no TVs because some parents, if you are one-on-one with your kid all the time, you know what? Sometimes you need a screen, even if it's just so you could go poop, or whatever, right? Or they get sick, they have a sick day, or you're isolated because everybody has COVID, so the TV's on. My grandparents, like I said, lived and died in front of the TV. When Rowan was a baby, the TV was on all the time because my grandma had the TV on all the time. There was always a television on somewhere in our house. But I think that them being able to experience all these generations, life and death, the way we all have different ideas for life and living, I think it's good for them. Um, okay, they get too much junk food some days. Sometimes I'm like, "Oh gosh, how many suckers have you had today that you managed to get finagle from your grandparents?"
Right.
But when I allow myself to think about it from my kids' perspective, they're gonna love that. Their grandparents aren't gonna be here forever, and they're in their 70s. I don't know how long they're gonna have them, and those are the things that they're gonna look back on and they're gonna love. They're gonna love when, "Oh, mom went away and I could get this from my TT," or, "Papa loved to do this with me when dad was at work," or, "I loved those days where we went and visited granddad once a week and got to I got to drill a bar soap with a real drill," stuff like that. Um, Especially because there's stuff that the grandparents do with them that I don't wanna do. There's that too, so I think it really broadens their horizon, and I also think that having them born into a house where my grandparents were passing, I think it made my grandparents' last few years a little richer and a little bit more beautiful for them, even though, like, sometimes I think their quality of life really went down because of the pandemic and because we were all struggling as a household just to be stuck together and how to navigate pregnancies and taking care of elders and the pandemic and not getting sick and not dying, like all of that. I think that having the babies there would always make my grandparents glow a little bit, even on the bad days.
Yeah, I can imagine. The family line continues.
Mhm. And that one of my core memories from that whole experience was so Everett was born May 31st, 2023, and grandma died November 5th that year. But I used to take him in there to see her once she went to her bedroom and, didn't come back out, basically. I would take him in there to see her, and he would babble to her. And they would have these conversations, which, I mean, he would just say some babble, and she'd be like, "Oh, really? I didn't know that," and, um, they just love to talk to each other, and even though they weren't even speaking the same language, right, at that point, just them like, the way that they would look at each other, because he would study her and she would study him, and there was definitely some major beauty in that the boys wouldn't have gotten, and then there was days where we would be struggling with how to take care of grandma and how to take care of granddad, and what do we do? But you could always go cuddle a baby, and there was that comfort there too. I think it's just really enriches their lives quite a bit.
Yeah, and to have such a broad collection of memories, not
Mhm.
only from their great grandparents, but from their grandparents. Because when I was growing up, I also lived with my grandparents
Yeah.
from kindergarten, first grade to around fourth grade.
Mhm.
And just the amount of day to day time you get with them, you can't exchange that for anything because my grandparents ended up dying all pretty young. But
Mhm.
I'm so lucky that I got to have that time living in the same space with them.
Yeah.
And I can look back on that part of my childhood and feel very nostalgic. And obviously, it's like golden and colored with all these memories of spending time with them. So I think it is kind of beautiful to be in their orbit on a consistent
Yeah.
basis.
And you get more one-on-one attention too that way, because there's a lot of times, especially since I had Everett, that I can't give Rowan the same amount of one-on-one time that I could before. Whereas, because I gotta go do something with Everett, which I can see that sometimes Rowan's like, "Oh, he's that stupid baby." Um, but he can usually find someone else. If dad's not home, he can find TT or he can find Pawpaw, there's someone else to spend some one-on-one time with them, and that's what he really values, and it doesn't matter to him if the one-on-one time is just sitting and watching a TV show. He doesn't care. Just having someone with him is key to him, and they always find fun, silly things to do too.
Has having kids changed your trajectory for what you want out of your career?
Absolutely, and it's funny because when I first dropped out of grad school, people were like, "So, you can always go back. You can always go back and finish." In my mind, I was like, "Ah, no, that's a lot of work." And now I'm like, I don't wanna do that. Like, it doesn't even occur to me that that's a life that I would wanna live. I'm actually have gone back to what I would say was my original passion. So, originally, as a kid, I wanted to be a writer, and everyone said, "You can't do that. You can't just that's cool as a hobby, but you can't just be a writer." But I decided to circle back to that in a way because when I had kids, so after I had Rowan, I was like, I'm gonna stay with him for a little while, but then I'm gonna go out and get a job of some sort. I figured it would be in research or historic preservation or something like that. And then I got pregnant with Everett, and we'd already always planned on having a second kid. We just got pregnant a little sooner than we had intended. Ironies of life in term when you think about our pregnancy journeys. But okay, when I got pregnant with him, I had actually just interviewed for a research job and pretty much had gotten it, but it was involved exposure to cigarette smokes because it was this researching cigarettes and vaping and all this stuff. I was like, "I can't do that while I'm pregnant, so I can't take that job, but I need a job, like, I need something for myself, I need my own source of income." It was kinda making me crazy not to have my own source of income, I need that. I wanted to do something that spoke to my passions, and having a second kid and thinking about my children, I was like, "I want my children to do some to feel like they can do something in their life that they want to do." And instead of what I ended up doing, which was sidelining my dreams and things for a variety of reasons, kind of my whole life, just failing in various things. So I started my own business, in editing and editing fiction. I'm also, I have written a book, working on what to do with the darn thing, as we've talked about before. But Yeah, so I don't know where my career is gonna end up. I still don't know all the answers there. My husband's like, "Just never work again, it's fine." I'm like, "What?"
Use this get out of jail free card while you
Yeah,
can.
yeah. It's like, "Don't worry about it, it's fine, we'll just live here forever." Like, yeah, well, I mean, we probably will at this point, but I still need something that's for me, My kids are heavily reliant on me now, but they're not always going to be. They're gonna go off and do their own things eventually, and I don't wanna be one of those people that when my kids go off, I then don't know what to do with my life. And I also just I do like to work. I don't wanna say I like having jobs, but there's aspects of work that I like to do, whatever you wanna classify work as. I love to sit down. I'm very much a Virgo personality.
Mm.
I love to sit down and edit someone's work and make it better and critique it and give them ideas on it, and all of my clients have said that what I've given them is, like, wonderful. So that's very encouraging to me. So I'm definitely hoping to pursue that, and the more clients I get, the better I feel about it. Basically, having my kids really inspired me to move forward with something that I really wanted to do. And I had been really afraid of starting my own business because I had just felt like I'm gonna put this money because you gotta put money into it to make it start. And I didn't it's wasn't like a ton of startup costs, but I needed to put a little bit of money into it. And I was just afraid it would flop because I've had so much flops in my career at this point, and it hasn't. And so I've been going for I started the gig in 2023, January 2023, while I was pregnant. In fact, like 2 weeks after I started it, my appendix exploded, and that was a whole 'nother thing, but that was a year for sure. But yeah, they've inspired me to do something that I really wanna do and to be brave about it, because I wanna set a good example for them.
Of course.
That makes sense. So, I'm hoping this works out. If it doesn't work out, I might end up teaching English high school at some point, which I'm fine with too, because 'cause I'll just critique the heck out of them, it's fine. They always need teachers. I might go back to historic preservation, but that's down the road. I think right now, building this clientele and kind of this community that I feel passionate about feels pretty good for me,
Of
so.
course. And where can our listeners find you if they need an editor?
Oh, yeah. It's like, oh. So I'm on Instagram. I have my own website too, but Instagram is probably the easiest place to find me. And I'm Better Than an Editor, LLC is my business name. And I got that from I actually started out doing edits and beta reads and stuff for people for free. And I had someone that I had volunteered to edit for, and she said that your stuff's better than my editor's work. And I was like, oh, okay.
Got something here.
So the more I thought about it, that's how I ended up with my business name. But yeah, I'm pretty active on Instagram. I'm not huge into building followers, but I try to support indie authors. I have a lot of friends who are indie authors, so I try to support them and post little nuggets of editing and support my clients too, however they need to. So
Nice.
yeah,
When I think about the story that you've shared today, it kind of encapsulates life's unexpected turns
absolutely.
from, leaving a PhD program to moving back and living in a vibrant multi-generational home to your path to motherhood.
Mhm.
And I'm reminded of the power of pivoting and just
Yeah,
being, someone who can adapt to life's changing demands. And it may not go exactly how you want it to go, but you can learn how to get what you want within that pivot, or at least
yeah.
some shade closer to what you want.
Yeah, and sometimes what you think you want isn't even what you wanted anyway. I mean, we're all highly enculturated from the time we're born. And that's something I think about as an anthropologist a lot with my kids. Like, oh, you're already so enculturated. Like, already my eldest son's like, toys, I want all the toys. I'm like, ah, you're such an American kid. But y- y- we're enculturated so young our society tries to push us in certain directions. You need a good career, you need a good job, you need a house with a white picket fence, you need there's certain things that you should need out of life. And they're not really needs and you might want them, but maybe you just want them because your society has told you that that's what you want. And so as you age and like you say things happen and you go from, living your own life with your husband out in Missouri away from your family to living in a house that literally ended up having 4 generations in it at one point. I mean, you end up learning a lot, and those pivots were those areas where we pivoted throughout our lives, me and my husband, because he was with me through this whole journey, I should say. I should give him kudos for all of that. He moved to Missouri with me and ended up moving back, and he's had to deal with all of this, which is all mostly my family, right? So that's a lot for him. But as we've moved through this journey at those different pivots, I think what we've wanted out of life has evolved. And the things that we thought we wanted, we didn't necessarily want. Now, we still want to go on adventures. We can't do with small children. Do I wanna go spend a year studying medical systems in Bangladesh anymore? No, not really. I don't
Right.
need to do that. Do I wanna go, have a vacation with him in Scotland one day? Yeah, that sounds cool, so various things like that. Major goals have shifted. Do I need to go be a professor at a university to feel fulfilled in my life like I thought I did when I was 25? No. No, I don't need that.
Well, do you have any final words that you'd want to share to someone just starting out on a path that could end up being very similar to yours?
Yeah, I would say give yourself some grace. That's the biggest thing I've had to learn, and I'm highly critical of myself, and I expect a lot from myself, and if I'm having a bad day, my day usually gets worse because I'm like, "I shouldn't be having this bad day," right? And I say that specifically bad days because when you live in a house with that many people and that much going on, people sick and dying and being born and all of these things, I mean, your days can go from, it can be dramatic how your one day may change. Um, but throughout that whole journey, there were so many times where I was so disappointed in myself. I might have been gone through spells where I was super depressed after the miscarriage, and I was really hard on myself during that time because it was like, what was wrong with me? Why I was so depressed, and then, I was so upset with myself for dropping out of my PhD program for a while, and I was like, "Well, I couldn't do it. I couldn't cut it," right? You have that feeling, like, I failed. I couldn't make the cut. I couldn't do what I needed to do. I just wish, looking back, that I had been easier on myself through all of those transitions. We've had a lot of, even aside from my grandparents being sick, we've had other hospitalizations in our household. My stepdad was hospitalized for a week while I was raising my toddler and pregnant with my second child, and that was a really challenging week for our family, and things like during those time periods, I just wish I had been easier on myself, uh, because I think I expected too much from myself, and I expected myself to recover from things, it's just that I wouldn't have expected from anyone else,
Right.
you know? And so I think that's key for anybody that's experiencing a major transition in life of any sort, is to just give yourself some grace. And, if you have to bail on something, just freaking bail on it. Life's too short to be miserable at something for long periods of time. You could go back to it if you wanted to. If I wanted to go back and finish my PhD, I probably could. I don't want to anymore. That's totally evolved.
Yeah, your priorities have shifted.
Yeah, my priorities have definitely shifted. But yeah, that would be my main thing. Give yourself some grace. Be easy on yourself. Even if you're having a crappy day, just be okay with it being a crappy day. Even if you're like, I can't believe I couldn't do that. I can't believe I bailed. Like, you know what? It's you made the best decisions you could in that moment. I think most of us do.
Mhm.
When you make big decisions, you're making the best decision you can, knowing what you know at that moment in that time. So you gotta give yourself some grace for the mistakes that you make. Probably not even mistakes, quite frankly. We are all looking for the right path, and I don't think that exists. I don't think there's any one right path. There's all kinds of different paths you can take. There's none that is like there's no path is gonna be the perfect path. And none of them are really that wrong either, with maybe a few exceptions.
Thanks for hanging out with us today. If you liked this episode, hit that subscribe button and share your thoughts or wild stories. Your feedback is like gold to us and keeps the good stuff coming. Also, follow us on social media and let's keep the conversation going. Until next time, keep reflecting and exploring. Peace.